Claire and Daniel Turner appeared to be the perfect couple, but behind Claire's quiet smile was a planned 5 years in the making, one that would turn their 20th anniversary trip into a calculated murder cloaked in romance and silence. Claire Turner stood in the kitchen of her perfectly decorated Charleston home, watching the coffee drip slowly into a ceramic mug. The smell filled the room, but her mind was far from the kitchen. It was their anniversary week, and Daniel was upstairs packing for their special trip. 20 years of marriage? That's what people would see, a milestone. A beautiful, successful couple heading out to celebrate 2 decades of love and life together. But the truth was heavier than the golden watch she had wrapped in a velvet box. The truth had been rotting in her chest for 5 years. She had once adored him, completely. Claire had met Daniel in high school. He was charming, funny, and always knew what to say. They dated through college and got married right after graduation. Everyone said they were the couple that others envied. Friends admired how easily they moved through life, raising 2 children, buying their first home, building careers. Daniel became a regional sales manager for a logistics company, while Claire worked part-time at a boutique flower shop. From the outside, their life was a magazine spread of suburban success. But marriage wasn't always what it seemed. When Claire found the messages on Daniel's old phone 5 years ago, it shattered everything. The texts weren't long, just enough to show her the truth. Her husband had been having an affair. Not just one, several. Some short flings, others emotional connections that had lasted months. And the worst part, he never told her. He never apologized until she confronted him, shaking and silent, holding the phone like it was covered in glass shards. She remembered how Daniel reacted, defensive at first, then apologetic, promising he'd change. He swore he was done with the lies. He begged her not to leave. And for a while, Claire didn't know what to do. Divorce seemed like the obvious choice, but she thought about the kids, the family vacations, the holidays they had already shared, the time they had built together. Starting over felt unbearable, so she told him she would try to forgive him. She said she wanted to rebuild, but forgiveness didn't come. What came instead was silence. Long nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Trips to the grocery store where she'd suddenly forget what aisle she was in. Bitter moments when she smiled through gritted teeth during dinners with friends. Claire became good at pretending. Too good, and Daniel? He returned to normal quickly. He was extra sweet, bought flowers, took her out more often. At first she thought maybe it meant he truly regretted everything. But after a few months she realized the attention wasn't about her. It was about washing himself clean. He wanted to be seen as a better man, someone who had grown from his mistakes. And she let him. She played her role so well that even their closest friends believed they were stronger than ever. But in private, Claire was keeping notes. In her mind, and eventually in a password-protected journal on her laptop, she documented everything. Her feelings, her ideas, her quiet, building rage. She didn't plan to hurt him at first. It started more like therapy, a way to release what she couldn't say out loud. But over time, something darker took root. The more she remembered his betrayals, the more she studied them, the more she began to think about what justice would look like. Real justice. The kind that couldn't be undone. It started as a fantasy. What if he just disappeared? What if he never got to live the next 20 years with the peace she had lost? What if he never got to walk his daughter down the aisle or play with grandchildren in the backyard? At first, these thoughts terrified her, but soon they became comforting. And then they became something else. She began researching things she had no business looking up. How long a person could survive in cold water, how long it took for a body to sink, how deep certain lakes were, how long it took for emergency teams to respond to calls in remote areas. She didn't search these things all at once. She spread them out. She deleted browser histories. She created a separate folder labeled Event Planning with hidden documents behind a password no one knew. Not even her closest friend Amanda, who often called Claire the most patient woman she'd ever met. The anniversary trip came up during a casual conversation in the spring. Daniel had suggested they go somewhere beautiful and quiet, just the 2 of them. Somewhere to mark 20 years in a meaningful way. Claire said yes almost immediately. She even smiled when she did. A cabin by the water, peaceful, remote, a chance to make new memories, he had said. She had nodded. In the weeks leading up to the trip, she began making small changes. She added extra insurance coverage to Daniel's life policy, using paperwork from a previous joint consultation as a reason. She called it just being prepared. She shopped for things carefully, a waterproof phone case, a new blanket for chilly nights by the water, a pair of hiking boots that looked sturdy but were slightly the wrong size for Daniel. She also made a quiet purchase online, something she told herself she might not even use, a vial of sedatives meant for a short term. Animal sedation, strong, quick-acting, almost undetectable if used correctly. Claire told herself again and again that she was just preparing, that maybe she wouldn't go through with anything. That maybe, once they got there, surrounded by water and trees and silence, she'd find peace. Maybe forgiveness would finally come. But the truth was, she had already made her choice. It had just taken her 5 years to act on it. As she poured the coffee and placed it gently on the table beside Daniel's packed bag, Claire took a deep breath and looked out the window. The sky was clear. The air was warm. It would be a perfect trip. And for Daniel Turner, it would be his last. The plane touched down in Seattle just after noon. Claire and Daniel made their way through the airport like any other happy couple on vacation. She wore a soft blue cardigan, her hair in loose waves, and a light smile on her face. Daniel wheeled their shared suitcase behind them, chatting about rental cars and dinner plans. They picked up their vehicle, a compact SUV, and began the 3-hour drive toward Lake Crescent, a deep glacial lake tucked inside Olympic National Park. Claire stared out the window most of the ride, watching the dense trees rush past. The sunlight filtered through the branches like gold dust, and Daniel filled the silence with memories and jokes from their early days. He seemed genuinely happy, as if this trip were a reward for surviving the hardest years of their marriage. Claire responded when she needed to, smiled when it was expected, and laughed at the right moments. But behind her eyes, everything was rehearsed. By the time they arrived at the cabin, the sun was beginning to lower behind the mountains. The small wooden structure sat right at the water's edge, with a private dock that stretched out over the glassy surface of the lake. It was stunning. Claire walked through the cabin slowly, taking in the rustic decor, the worn wood floors, and the view from the back window. Daniel wrapped his arm around her and said it was exactly what they needed. She nodded in agreement. In her mind, everything was right on schedule. That evening, they ate dinner at a small lakeside cafe. Claire ordered grilled salmon and drank half a glass of red wine. Daniel had steak and 2 beers, then joked about falling asleep before 10. They returned to the cabin just as the sky turned purple. Claire lit a fire in the stone fireplace while Daniel unpacked. Later, they sat out on the deck, wrapped in blankets, and watched the stars appear one by one. Claire leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. He kissed her hair and whispered that he was glad they made it through everything. She said nothing. The next morning, Claire rose before dawn. She dressed quietly, laced up her boots, and packed a small bag. Inside, she placed a thermos, 2 mugs, a folded blanket, and a small metal container. She moved slowly and deliberately. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. When Daniel finally stirred, she was already on the porch with 2 steaming mugs. He joined her, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and thanked her for the coffee. Claire handed him the one she had poured from the thermos, the one that contained just enough sedative to make him sleepy, just enough to blur the edges of his balance. They sipped in silence, watching the mist float across the lake. A little later, Claire suggested they take the boat out. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but she smiled and said it would be romantic. He agreed. They walked hand in hand down to the dock. The rented rowboat was tied loosely, bobbing slightly. Claire helped him climb in, steadying the boat with one hand while slipping the bag under the seat with the other. Once seated, Daniel took the oars and began rowing slowly out onto the lake. The water was still and dark. The hills surrounding them were draped in heavy pine trees, and the only sounds were birds in the distance and the occasional splash of water against the wooden hull. Claire pulled the blanket around her shoulders and leaned back, pretending to enjoy the calm. Daniel looked content. Drowsy, his strokes began to slow, and he paused to wipe his forehead. After 20 minutes, they reached a spot far enough from shore to feel completely alone. Daniel set the oars down and leaned back with a sigh. He said something about the beauty of it all, how lucky they were, how far they'd come. His voice was soft, slow, almost slurred. Claire nodded as if in agreement, but inside her chest, her heart was pounding. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When they opened again, his gaze was unfocused. Claire knew the sedative was working. She reached down into the bag, gripped the edge of the container, and waited. Daniel shifted, trying to stand, maybe to stretch. His movements were clumsy. He stumbled. The boat rocked sharply. Claire didn't move. The moment came quickly. A splash, a cry, the sudden tilt of the boat as Daniel slipped into the water. Claire watched as he flailed once, then again. His limbs thrashed, but there was no rhythm. He couldn't swim. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the churning water. His head surfaced once. Then it vanished beneath the dark, cold surface. The ripples grew wider, softer, until the lake returned to stillness. Claire waited 1 minute, then 2, then 10. Her breathing slowed. Eventually, she rocked the boat slightly and tipped the bag overboard. The empty thermos floated for a moment, then sank. She splashed a little water onto herself, wetting her shirt and hair, then leaned over and began calling out his name, not loud enough for real help, but just enough to echo across the empty lake. She screamed once, let her voice crack, and rocked the boat again to make it drift. By the time the park rangers found her, she was curled up on the shoreline, barefoot, wet, shaking. Her story was simple. Daniel had fallen. She had tried to save him. She couldn't find him. They believed her. There was no one else around. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no weapon. Just a missing man and a grieving wife. They sent divers. Boats scanned the lake for 3 days. But Lake Crescent was nearly 600 feet deep in some places, cold, dark, and silent. No body ever surfaced. Claire answered questions calmly. She stayed in a local hotel while the search continued. She cried in front of the cameras. She gave statements. When she finally returned home, the story was already fading from the headlines. Another tragedy. Another loving husband lost in an accident. Another wife left to pick up the pieces. But Claire knew this wasn't an accident. She knew she hadn't just lost her husband. She had erased him. The days following Daniel's disappearance passed in a blur. Claire stayed in a local motel just outside the park, wrapped in grief she didn't have to fake. She appeared devastated. Her eyes were red, her voice low and trembling. She gave the same story again and again. They were enjoying the morning on the lake. The boat rocked, Daniel lost his balance, and he fell in. She had tried to help but couldn't reach him in time. She waited. She screamed. Then she drifted back to shore, alone. The park rangers believed her. She had no visible injuries, no history of violence. Claire had been cooperative, answering all their questions, providing details without hesitation. A tragedy, they called it, a heartbreaking accident. The water in Lake Crescent was notoriously deep and freezing cold year-round. Recovery efforts were often difficult, and in some cases, bodies were never found. Daniel's case was quickly categorized as another unfortunate drowning. A report was filed, and the search ended on the 4th day. Claire stood on the dock that last morning, watching as the search boats packed up. Her face was blank, unreadable. A ranger patted her on the shoulder and told her to take care of herself. She nodded slowly, clutching the blanket around her. She had brought the same one from the boat, now carefully laundered and folded. She left it behind in the cabin. When she returned to Charleston, she was met with sympathetic faces and quiet condolences. Her neighbors brought flowers. Friends delivered casseroles and cards. Her children, both in college, came home immediately. Claire hugged them tightly, pressing her face into their shoulders as they cried. She played the part perfectly, every moment shaped by years of practice, the grieving widow, blindsided by loss. The memorial was small. Without a body, there was no burial. Just a framed photograph of Daniel placed on a table beside a single candle. Claire kept her remarks short, holding back tears. She thanked everyone for coming, for their support. She never let her hands shake. When people embraced her afterward, they whispered words of comfort. No one suspected anything. To them, Claire was strong and silent, carrying her sorrow with grace. Insurance inquiries began soon after. Claire had filed the paperwork herself just 1 week after returning from Washington. The policy Daniel had through his employer paid out a respectable sum. But the second policy, the one Claire had quietly increased just weeks before the trip, was the real reward. $2 million, no questions asked. The insurer required only a copy of the police report and an affidavit stating that Daniel was presumed dead. Claire provided everything. The payout arrived 6 weeks later. She deposited it in a separate account under her name only. She didn't spend the money right away. Instead, she returned to work at the flower shop, though only part-time. Her friends admired her resilience. They invited her to luncheons, encouraged her to take yoga classes, offered to set her up when she was ready. Claire declined, saying she needed time. In truth, she was being cautious. She knew attention would fade if she remained quiet and steady. But peace wasn't permanent. 6 months later, an email arrived. No subject line, no name attached. Just a single line of text. She planned it. Below it were 4 image attachments. Claire opened them slowly. The first was a screenshot of a Google search. How long to drown in cold water? The next was an email sent from Claire's account to a burner address, containing nothing but a line reading, "We move forward as discussed." The third was a snapshot of the hidden folder on her laptop, the one she thought she had deleted. The fourth was a copy of the amended life insurance application. Claire froze. Her chest tightened as she read the email over and over. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. She tried to trace the sender but found nothing. The email address was a string of random characters. The IP was masked. It had come from an untraceable source. A week later, the email was forwarded to Daniel's sister, Lisa. Unlike others, Lisa had always been skeptical of the story Claire told. She didn't voice it much at first, out of respect for her grieving niece and nephew. But she never quite believed that Daniel had just fallen. He wasn't the kind of man to lose balance like that, and he had always been cautious around water. Lisa took the email straight to the local police, who reopened the case and contacted investigators in Washington. Digital forensic experts began combing through Claire's old devices. They retrieved fragments of deleted files, screenshots, and metadata. One by one, pieces of the puzzle began to appear. Searches about lake temperatures, drowning times, undetectable poisons, and how to simulate accidents, all conducted from Claire's IP address in the months leading up to the trip. The most damning evidence was the existence of the folder itself. Though Claire had deleted it, remnants remained. Recovery tools revealed the contents: a document labeled Plan, Final Version, with a full itinerary of the trip, including timelines, transportation info, and notes about deep water locations. Another file listed insurance policy updates with the note, "Done 4/3. The investigation intensified." Claire's banking history showed the sudden deposit of the insurance funds. And though that wasn't criminal in itself, it added weight to the emerging theory that Daniel's death wasn't accidental. Phone records were pulled, emails were examined. Surveillance footage from outdoor gear stores confirmed that Claire had purchased the sedatives under a fake pet medication order weeks before the trip. A warrant was issued, and Claire was arrested quietly one morning as she returned home from her weekly yoga class. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as officers led her to an unmarked car. Her face remained still, expressionless, even as the cameras caught her in handcuffs. She said nothing to the press. Inside the police station, she asked for a lawyer and refused to speak further. News of her arrest spread quickly. The same people who had brought her sympathy cards now shook their heads in disbelief. Social media lit up with shock. "She always seemed so sweet," one neighbor told a local reporter. "It just doesn't make sense." But it made perfect sense. The pieces were all there. The motive, the planning, the cold execution. Claire hadn't snapped in a moment of rage. She had waited, calculated, and acted with precision. Daniel Turner had vanished on a still, sunny morning on Lake Crescent. Now, 6 months later, the truth was finally coming to the surface. Claire sat alone in the gray interview room, her wrist still marked red from the cuffs. The room was cold and silent, the kind of silence meant to pull words out of people. But Claire said nothing. Across the table, two detectives watched her carefully, shuffling papers, adjusting their chairs, letting the evidence speak for itself. There was no confession. Claire was too careful for that, too practiced. But she didn't need to speak for the puzzle to come together. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The sedative she had purchased under the guise of pet medication had been traced back to an online pharmacy, ordered from her home IP address, shipped to a P.O. box rented under a fake name, a name linked to a prepaid debit card, which was traced to a purchase at a gas station near her neighborhood. Surveillance footage placed Claire at the counter. She wore sunglasses and a hat, but it was her. The timestamp matched the transaction exactly. The investigators had pieced together a timeline so tight, so detailed, there was hardly room for doubt. Her internet searches dated back months: drowning simulations, undetectable drugs, how deep Lake Crescent was, and how long bodies typically take to resurface in cold water. She had studied articles, downloaded PDFs from obscure websites, and kept notes in her hidden folder. Though she had attempted to delete everything, modern forensics didn't need the full files, only fragments. A single autosave draft, buried in her system's memory, described step-by-step actions for what she titled Morning of. The recovered document included the following: administer dose at 6:15 a.m., ensure no electronics on him, and drop thermos and blanket, no evidence left behind. She had accounted for wind direction, lake depth, even the time rangers began patrol shifts. The precision was chilling. Then came the insurance documents. Claire had increased Daniel's life insurance policy just 32 days before the trip. She had included false information on his health and behavior to justify the higher payout. She claimed he had recently received a clean bill of health and had no dangerous hobbies. Emails recovered from her inbox showed she had followed up repeatedly with the insurer, pressing for confirmation. All of it within weeks of planning their romantic anniversary getaway. The autopsy, of course, didn't exist. No body had been found. But medical experts testified that in certain cold, deep waters like Lake Crescent, a body could remain submerged indefinitely. The water was so dense and cold that decomposition slowed significantly, preventing gases from forming that would normally lift a body to the surface. Given the conditions and Daniel's lack of swimming skills, the probability of survival was virtually zero. Without a body, the case had to rely on motive, planning, and circumstantial evidence. But every piece pointed directly to Claire. Her trial began just under a year after Daniel's disappearance. The courtroom was filled with reporters, old friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Claire arrived each day in neatly pressed clothing, her expression calm, almost empty. The woman who had once been praised for her composure in grief now sat in silence while prosecutors described her as calculating and cold. They called her a woman who smiled while plotting. A woman who had buried her rage under years of routine until she saw an opening and took it. They showed the jury her search history, her emails, her financial moves. They described how she lulled Daniel into believing everything was fine, only to kill him when he least expected it, alone, in the middle of a silent lake. Witnesses testified. Lisa Turner, Daniel's sister, spoke about the strange email she received and her suspicions from the very beginning. A digital forensic analyst explained how Claire had tried to scrub her laptop but failed. A pharmacology expert detailed the effects of the sedative she had used, explaining how it would have disoriented Daniel just enough to make him fall, but not kill him directly. He would have drowned slowly, confused and unable to fight against the water. Claire's defense attorney tried to argue reasonable doubt. They emphasized the lack of a body. They suggested someone could have tampered with her computer. They hinted that Daniel could have fallen due to fatigue or alcohol, but the jury wasn't swayed. The volume and detail of the evidence were too much. This wasn't an impulsive act. It had been built carefully, day by day, over 5 years of resentment. In the final days of the trial, Claire took the stand. Her voice was soft. She described years of betrayal, of feeling humiliated, of sleepless nights and endless disappointment. She admitted to writing about her pain, about imagining revenge, but she denied carrying it out. She insisted she had deleted the folder because it scared her, not because she had used it. Her words were calm, but the courtroom could feel the emptiness behind them. Her grief had never seemed real. Now, neither did her denial. When the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder, Claire didn't flinch. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no visible emotion. Not a single tear. The courtroom was silent except for the scribble of pens and the distant clicking of cameras. Outside the courthouse, Lisa Turner spoke to reporters. She said justice had been done even if they never got Daniel's body back. She said her brother had trusted Claire, had believed in their second chance, and that trust had cost him his life. She held a small framed photo of him, one taken years before, smiling on a family trip, unaware of the storm that had been growing beside him. Back in Charleston, neighbors removed the flowers from their lawns. Claire's house was eventually sold, the money frozen and used for court fees. Her children, devastated and confused, moved away quietly. They had lost both parents, one to death, the other to prison. Claire was taken to a state correctional facility hours away, where she was processed and placed in a general unit. She kept to herself. She didn't speak to the other inmates. She didn't participate in programs. When reporters tried to contact her, she declined all interviews. She never appealed her conviction. She simply disappeared into silence, just like Daniel had vanished beneath the surface of Lake Crescent. The lake remained still and beautiful, surrounded by trees and mystery. Tourists came and went, never knowing the story it had swallowed. No marker stood there, no reminder. Just the water, cold, quiet, and deep, keeping its final secret. In the years following the trial, the story of Claire and Daniel Turner faded slowly from headlines, but it never completely disappeared. True crime forums picked it apart, speculating on missing details and unconfirmed theories. Some believed there was more to the case, perhaps a secret accomplice or evidence hidden in the cabin that authorities missed. Others were convinced Claire had manipulated everyone from the beginning, weaving a web of quiet deceit so intricate that it nearly worked. To most, however, the case was a chilling reminder of how well darkness could hide behind a smile. Claire adjusted to life in prison without much trouble. She followed the rules, spoke only when necessary, and kept to herself. Other inmates quickly learned that she wasn't one to gossip or joke. She moved like a ghost, polite, quiet, unreadable. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. She passed her days in routine, reading, eating, walking the yard. The guards noted that she was neither hostile nor social, just distant, emotionally absent, almost hollow. Some inmates recognized her from the news. Whispers followed her at first. That lake woman, the one who killed her husband on vacation. A few tried to provoke her, asking what really happened on the water that morning. Claire never responded. Over time, even those whispers faded. She became just another face in the crowd, her notoriety shrinking behind the prison walls. Despite the silence outside the facility, the ripples of her crime never fully settled. Daniel's children, now adults, continued to carry the weight of what had happened. At first, they had refused to believe their mother could be capable of such a thing. During the trial, they had sat on the fence, unsure, torn between loyalty and doubt. But the evidence had overwhelmed them. The messages, the searches, the careful planning. The woman they had trusted had lived a double life beneath their roof. After the verdict, both of them changed their last names. They moved to separate cities and rarely spoke of their childhood. One of them went to therapy. The other buried himself in work. Birthdays and holidays became reminders of what was lost, not just a father, but also the mother they thought they knew. For them, grief was confusing, layered with betrayal and shame. Friends didn't know what to say, strangers only saw headlines. Lisa Turner, Daniel's sister, stayed in Charleston. She kept a box of his belongings, mostly photos and old letters, in the back of her closet. She didn't speak of him often, but every now and then she would drive out to the water edge at Sullivan Island, where Daniel used to bring the kids when they were little. She'd sit in her car and watch the ocean move. It wasn't Lake Crescent, but it was the closest thing she had. Each time she told herself that somewhere beneath that cold Washington water, justice had finally settled. But questions remained. People wondered, What really happened on that boat? Did Daniel know? Did he see it coming in those final moments, or was it quiet, slow, a peaceful slip into nothing? The truth was locked in Claire's mind, a place no one could reach, and she never spoke of it. Not to lawyers, not to investigators, not even to the prison psychologist who asked gentle questions during mandatory assessments. She spoke of grief, yes, and of feeling abandoned by her husband years before his death, but she never admitted guilt. Not once, not in court, not after sentencing, not in the years that followed. Instead, she focused on small, controlled tasks. She kept a journal filled with quotes copied from books she read. She painted landscapes in the art program, always of mountains, forests, or lakes. Never people, never faces. When one counselor asked about her artwork, she simply said she liked quiet places. Then, one day, 5 years into her sentence, Claire received a letter. It was unsigned, but she recognized the handwriting. It belonged to her daughter. The words were simple, clipped, and filled with pain. "You ruined everything," it read. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I hope you think about what you did. Every day." Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it between the pages of a novel. She didn't cry. But for the first time in years, she didn't finish her meal that evening. Outside the prison, the lake remained unchanged. Tourists continued to visit, unaware of its grim legacy. Occasionally, a park ranger would get questions about that murder case from years ago, and they'd nod grimly, giving only the basics. Some hikers said they felt a strange stillness by the water, a quiet that seemed deeper than usual. A few even claimed they saw shadows beneath the surface, dark and long, as if something or someone was still there. But Daniel Turner was never found. Divers had given up years earlier. Without a body, there would never be a proper burial, no gravestone. Just a plaque placed in his memory at the church he once attended. It read, "Daniel A. Turner, father, brother, gone too soon." For many, that was the end of the story. A man lost to a lake, a woman imprisoned, a family broken. But behind the facts lay something more haunting. The slow unraveling of love into hatred. The way forgiveness could be faked. The quiet planning done not in a moment of passion, but over years of smiles, family dinners, and silent rage. Claire Turner hadn't killed in anger. She had waited. She had studied. She had smiled at the man she planned to bury beneath still water. That was what chilled people the most. Because if someone like Claire, so poised, so devoted, so normal, could commit such a calculated murder, then what did that mean for everyone else? It meant the monsters weren't always strangers in the dark. Sometimes they were the person lying next to you, waiting, watching, smiling,